the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Stuart Young, and our Minister of Finance, the Honorable Colum Imbert. Mr. Stuart Young would lead on.
Thank you very much, Minister of Communications, the Honorable Donna Cox. Good morning, or good afternoon, members of the media. Exactly a week ago, I stood as the Minister of National Security at the last post-cabinet press conference and informed the public of Trinidad and Tobago of a decision that the government had taken with respect to the demonetization of $100 notes. And very quickly thereafter, you all saw a sequence of events begin to unfold. By now, it should be obvious to anyone who's observing that the sequence of events that very quickly followed have been very carefully planned, and a lot has gone into ensuring that things fall into place. So immediately after, we went to Parliament. On the Friday in the House of Representatives, on the Saturday in the Senate, legislation was unanimously passed in both the House as well as the Senate. There was no objection, there was no one abstaining either. As soon as the legislation became law and was assented to, the announcement was made by the Governor of the Central Bank on Monday that the demonetization date would be the 31st of December. As I say, this was all very well planned. A lot of planning and effort went into it. Over that period, on Saturday, I can confirm, on Saturday gone, the security forces brought in and assisted with the bringing in and the depositing of $8 billion in cash. That is 80 million new polymer $100 notes. Again, that went flawlessly, and we were able to properly secure it. And that money has now, those notes have now begun to flow into the system. Throughout this process, as soon as persons, key and critical persons became aware, for example, my colleague, the Minister of Finance, meetings were held with the relevant authorities. Today is just to answer and to respond to a few of the concerns that have been raised, and just to give the reassurance that, as you've seen, we are listening, we are observing, but we're sticking to the dates that have been given, and also to tell you all some of the examples of what we're finding. As was stated last week Thursday and repeated throughout the two debates in the two houses of Parliament, this was done for national security purposes. We're beginning to see those national security purposes were correct in some of the information that we're getting at this stage. We've been working very closely with the central bank, who, as I have said repeatedly, is the administrator and the implementer of this government policy. Also, I'd like to thank the banks for very quickly working along with the central bank and the government to be part of the process of the rollout, because at the end of the day, the banks are the ones who are the front line and interacting with the members of the public. We had always stated from the word go that we recognize that there would be inconvenience to our citizens and to persons who have to interface. But to take stock, there have been only 2 days since the rollout and the interaction of the exchange of the cotton $100 bills for the new polymer bills have taken place. The ATMs at 3 of our major banks are up and running, the vast majority of them, and we've been told that before the end of the week, and definitely by the weekend, all of their ATMs would be working. Some of the other banks, and Minister Imbert can get into the specifics, may have some difficulties because of the type of machines they have. We are pleased with this, because at the beginning and at the outset, when we informed the banks, because not even the banks were aware that government would be taking this decision, initially the time frames that we were told with respect to the ATMs was a lot longer. In fact, one of the daily newspapers started off the week with that as their headline story, that the ATMs would be a problem. Well, we're happy to see that the ATMs are not the problem. The ATMs, vast majority of them now, are dispensing the new polymer notes and will continue, and very shortly all of them will be dispensing, and this will assist the members of the public. We have seen some of the inconvenience taking place. Again, Minister Imbert and myself have been in constant contact with the banks and the central bank, and you would have seen by now that the Bankers Association, in one of their latest releases, I assume it's been put out by now, they've been working with us, have given the assurance that they're recognizing that certain of the customers, especially our elderly in our society, were being more inconvenience than others, and they are going to make the necessary arrangements to facilitate our elderly. We are very aware of the situation and circumstances. From a security point of view, once again, our security forces, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them, have been working along with the private security being utilized in these efforts, and they have been providing that additional security web and net. And I'll get into some of the specifics after. But at this stage, I'd like to thank the members of the public, the vast majority of you all, for going through this process. As we said at the outset, this is a simple exchange. You take in your old cotton notes and you get your new polymer notes according to the guidelines as set out by the central bank and the various banks, the 4 major banks, as has been articulated by the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I'll pass over to Minister Imbert, and then I'll come back to discuss some of the security arrangements and some of the information that we've been picking up so far.
Thank you, Minister Young. And I'd like to re-emphasize that this decision was motivated by national security considerations. So the role of the Ministry of Finance and the central bank is to support the Ministry of National Security in its security initiatives. What we have done is met with the banks on 2 occasions so far. It may be necessary to have another meeting with them within the next day or 2 just to get a status report. But we are getting status reports from the banks through the Bankers Association and I would say an informal grouping of the 4 major banks: Republic Bank, Royal Bank, Scotia Bank, and First Citizens Bank. These 4 banks handle the majority of banking transactions in Trinidad and Tobago. The other banks are much smaller, have much fewer branches and far fewer ATMs. Banks such as JMMB Bank and First Citizens in FCIB, First Caribbean, sorry. I think it's First Caribbean, yeah. And then you have, I think there's a bank with just 1 branch, that's Citibank. I'm not sure how many branches they have. So that the banks that deal with the vast majority of customers are the 4 that I just called. Let me just repeat them: Republic Bank, Royal Bank, Scotia Bank, FCB. So we've been meeting with them. And in the first meeting, we asked them to bring their operations people. These are the people that deal with operations within the bank itself, across the counter operations, which would be relevant to persons making deposits and changing notes. Also the persons that deal with their automatic teller machines, the ATMs, and their security people as well, who have to liaise with the Ministry of National Security. Initially, as Minister Young just told you, at our first meeting with the banks, which was on Friday of last week, Cabinet having taken the decision on Thursday, they told us that their initial response from their ATM provider, the supplier of the ATM machines, was that it would take some time to modify the ATMs to receive and dispense the new polymer notes. Very fortunately, that original estimate has turned out to be a bit of an exaggeration. Initially, they had told us it could take a month, 2 months, that sort of thing. Some of them said 3 months. And what I'm very happy to report is, as of yesterday, FCB reported to me that they were already dispensing the polymer notes through some of their ATMs. This is yesterday morning. I got that report from FCB. Republic Bank is now reporting that more than half of their ATMs are dispensing the new polymer notes, and I expect Royal Bank to follow suit. There's a little issue with Scotia Bank because they use different technology. They use image recognition, I believe, such as is done in the United States. If any of you have seen that in the United States, you put in a note and the machine scans it using imaging technology. So Scotiabank had gone to this next level, next generation of ATMs, and they needed a little more time. But Royal Bank, Republic Bank, First Citizens Bank all have the same type of machine, the same provider, and they are already beginning to dispense notes. The issues are arising, so we deal with the banks on a daily basis. They talk to us, we consult, we speak to the governor of the central bank, If meetings are necessary, we hold them. We communicate in various forms, telephone, email, etc. And as issues arise, we've been looking at solutions to these issues. I can tell you, it was reported to me today that there are persons arriving in the banks with very large quantities of cash, very large. We're talking $500,000 and more. And some of these people, I can't say how many because I don't have a detailed report yet, are finding it difficult to fill out a source of funds declaration to indicate where they got the money from. So that's posing a little challenge for the commercial banks, because if someone walks in with $1 million in cash and then says, well, I got this from savings over the years, something like that, it's proving to be a little challenge for the bank. In cases like that, where it's difficult, where there's some difficulty with the source of funds declaration, the persons would be advised to go to the central bank to change the notes or get some sort of consideration for the notes. And basically that's it. I just want to say this is a work in progress. We are dealing with the issues as they arise. As issues come up, we are addressing it. We are all working together as a team. The banks are cooperating. The central bank is cooperating. We at Finance are putting all our resources into it, and we're trying to deal with issues as they arise. At this point in time, we're just adopting a very listening mode, just to hear what people are saying and see how they can be accommodated. Answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. One of the issues that has arisen was issues that appeared by our Muslim brothers and sisters. Immediately when it was raised with the government made it very clear after discussion with the central bank that no one is required to open an account and to put their money into the system. Because we heard that because of certain religious beliefs, there are some who worship with the Islamic faith that may be adverse for religious reasons of banking their money, so to speak. We are making it clear once again that there is no requirement for those of our Muslim brothers and sisters who don't want to bank in the system to open accounts and to put their money in. The central bank is very, very clear that they will do the exchange of notes. I'd also like to take this opportunity that again from the Muslim community, one of the largest organizing bodies, ASJA, came out very positively yesterday with a statement that said that they support the law enforcement initiative and the good governance initiative, I'm paraphrasing, of this decision for demonetization. And that is something we thank them for, because they're a very influential body in the Islamic faith. Just to touch a little bit on one of the examples that Minister Imbert spoke about, we are picking up, remember it's only 2 days, today is the 3rd day, we have already begun to pick up in the system some very, very unusual transactions. There are law enforcement officers who are part of this whole process and who are stationed where they need to be based on previous intelligence and based on it's very, very fluid and we're learning as it goes along. But some of the examples would shock any law-abiding citizen of persons turning up with significant amounts of cash, and when being asked about the source of funds, some of the explanations is very difficult from a plausibility point of view. The Ministry of National Security said in a statement a couple of days ago very clearly, and this was followed by a press conference yesterday by the head of the FIB of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as well as the head of the Financial Intelligence Unit, that money laundering is a criminal offense. And the assisting in money laundering is a criminal offense. And that was putting up a marker and warning everyone in Trinidad and Tobago, don't fall prey to being part of money laundering. We have had quite a few instances of persons turning up and claiming to be of professions that you'd be very surprised for them to be carrying around $1 million in cash and thereabouts, some with more than $1 million in cash. Again, the law that is already in existence deals with these instances. So we did not create any new law apart from the amendment to the Central Bank Act with Section 27A, which was to facilitate this demonetization process. Explain your wealth, the need for persons to explain source of funds, what are considered large transactions that the Minister of National Security over the weekend gone, I did sign an order reducing the amount from $90,000 in the law as definition of large transactions to $50,000. The Bankers Association, they are all going through their KYCs, know your customer, as well as their anti-money laundering instances, following their procedures. So is the central bank. As Minister Imbert said, if you're having difficulties at the various commercial banks, central bank is prepared. This does not mean that there will not be a need for an explanation as to source of funds. This was being driven by national security, for national security purposes. There was no way that we as an administration, having the information that we had, were prepared to allow exactly what you, the population, are now seeing, where ridiculous sums. One of the heads of one of these major commercial banks told me last night that in the first 2 days, $150 million had been pushed out into the system. This is of the new polymer notes. $150 million in 2 days of cash being now put into the system by persons doing the exchanges. Another bank just told me as we left cabinet, another one of these major 4 banks, $120 million. I'd also like to say that again, this was well planned. So we knew how much money, new notes we had to bring into the system. And there are sufficient new notes, as I've just told you all the amount that has been brought into the system. I'd like to thank the security forces, both private as well as our state security forces, for being able to do what needs to be done for the distribution. Tobago was not left out. We, the state, took it upon ourselves for the first few transactions to make sure that our brothers and sisters in Tobago, our sister isle, also had money available at the same time that Trinidad and Tobago has had. But the marker that we're putting down, as we're seeing it, you would have seen in the statements made by national security as well as the police service and the FIU, instances of persons turning up with $1 million trying to buy foreign used cars, persons turning up trying to buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, persons turning up at the banks trying to encash hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in some instances, and then telling us some very dubious professions as to where the money came from. But that is where law enforcement gets involved. The law already provides for these instances. Part of this exercise is the gathering of information, and I'll leave it at that at this stage. At this stage, I think both Minister Imbert and myself are here and available to answer whatever questions you all may have.
Ms. Imbert, has Scotiabank said when the ATMs will be ready to dispense the new notes?
I wouldn't want to give any time frame. Scotiabank was in that group of responses where they said 1 to 3 months. But so were the other banks. And surprisingly and very fortunately, the banks got it sorted out in 2 days. So we're hopeful that if Royal and Republic can do that, I see no reason why Scotia can't get the machine sorted out very quickly. I wouldn't want to give a date now because they haven't given us an update on exactly when the Scotiabank ATMs will be dispensing the $100 polymer notes.
Yeah, Minister Young, could you give us some of the examples of some of the explanations that are being given for these large sums?
I have been in constant contact with both the state security services as well as the heads of security for the various banks. I don't want to divulge too much at this stage. I've given some examples, for example, turning up with $1 million in cash to buy motor vehicles. We've had some ridiculous examples of persons going to legitimate businesses, placing orders in cash, then canceling the orders when it's time to collect and saying, well, give me a check instead. We did not invent this process. In the studying of what we could have expected and looking at other jurisdictions, we were aware. I am happy that our law enforcement are involved, and they will be the ones to provide some of the examples as we go along. But it is within the ambit of the current law, and we didn't change this, for police officers, custom officers as well, when faced with persons with large sums of money who do not have a proper explanation as to how they came about with the money, or that there has any suspicion that the proceeds of crime, for law enforcement to carry out a process, an interrogation process, and if not satisfied with the answer, a seizure process, and then it goes to court. That is being employed and implemented across the country as we speak.
And with that also, you mentioned dubious professions. Would you be willing to give examples there?
We've had somebody, for example, turn up and say he was a barber with over $1 million in cash. So that's a very expensive set of haircuts. But again, not casting any aspersions, that is for law enforcement to deal with, but over $1 million in cash, saying that he's a barber.
Louisa from CNC3, are you able to say how many transactions would have been flagged in the past couple of days?
No, I can't provide that information at this stage. Understand that this process, our main focus is facilitating or helping the banks and the central bank to facilitate all of our citizens out there who want to get the exchange done, knowing that the deadline is for the 31st. At the end of this, or even before, if there's a post-mortem to be given and we can give information, we will. But also understand, in the laws exist that captures all of this, there's a crime and offense of tipping off. I certainly am not going to fall prey to that, nor are others. It's in the hands of law enforcement. Our job is to provide sufficient resources to law enforcement. And as I say, this is a very fluid exercise that is taking place.
I was just about to come in there. Minister Young has said what I wanted to say, but I want to reinforce it. We at the Ministry of Finance, of course, are being advised by counsel every step of the way. And one of the pieces of advice we received is that there is a crime, the offense of tipping off. In other words, if someone engages in something called a suspicious transaction, in other words, the source of funds declaration looks questionable, the bank official is not allowed to tell that person, look, I'm about to do a suspicious activity report on you. And therefore, some of the questions you're asking, we can't legally answer them. So I just want to get that clear. There are some things we just can't tell you because it would be an offense under the laws governing money laundering and things like that.
Minister Young said that it's supposed to be a simple exchange process. You come in with the old notes, you receive the new notes. But I have had reports of people saying that they are being forced, especially if you do have a bank account, to deposit your money into that bank account. So let us say you go in with $2 million, for instance, and you fill out your source of funds document, you're being forced to deposit that money, and then you can only withdraw, I think, up to $50,000. But then there is a charge for depositing that money and also charges when you have to withdraw that money. So they actually being charged or have to pay fees as opposed to just coming in with their $2 million and being able to walk out with that $2 million. Is anything being done to stop?
Would you identify yourself, please?
Sorry, Alicia Boucher from TV6.
Okay. There are a lot of anecdotes outside there, some of which are true, quite a few are not true. Many of the stories that I'm seeing in the newspapers and on social media are not true. I have been talking to the banks about this. The banks put out a press release, an advisory on exactly how they are going to treat with customers. If you're a regular customer at the bank, if you have a familiar banking pattern, the banks have said they will allow you to deal with a transaction up to $50,000. When you're over $50,000, then you hit a threshold. That's called a large transaction, where a second layer of due diligence comes in. So that I've heard stories about banks only giving people $1,000 in new Polymer notes. What we need, what we at the Ministry of Finance need in a case like that is better information. We can't handle a story like that. If somebody says, I went to the bank and they only allowed me $1,000, we need specifics. Because when I talk to the Bankers Association, they say those stories are not true. With respect to the charges, there are standard fees for deposits, withdrawals, etc. Some banks charge, other banks don't. I don't want to call the names of the banks to cause any bacchanal of the ones that don't charge. I know there are some that are charging and some that are not charging, but I am told, and I get this in writing from the bankers group, that the fees that they are charging are their standard fees for the same type of transaction the same fees they have charged in the past. If anybody has information that this is not true, that banks are really doing things that they should not do, then they need to bring it to our attention. Okay? And I don't mind any member of the media giving me the information. I just need specifics. It can't be anecdotes that are not supported by evidence. For example, I think an entire newspaper story was written about a WhatsApp message that somebody was collecting a commission for changing notes. There's no background to that WhatsApp message. The identity of the perpetrator is not known. You don't know if it's a fake WhatsApp message or anything. These things are not helpful. We at Finance will do whatever we can to deal with any problem, any inconvenience that people are experiencing. We are here to help. So we just need more information, better information. If there's a particular bank, a particular branch that is inconveniencing people, we just need to get the information.
I just want to add one thing to what you asked Minister Imbert about. Huh? What you've just quoted is actually what the Bankers Association from day one came out and said. So they said, if you're a customer at the bank, you can come in and deposit your money and they'll give you up to 50,000 in new polymer notes. That also is for your own security. But as Minister Imbert said, if of course you're the type of business that has a pattern from before, that you're a very cash-driven business, a grocery or something like that, they do make exceptions for it. We're certainly not encouraging people. Remember, this is cash you're dealing with. You're talking about somebody who walks in with $2 million in cash. I don't know who's ever seen $2 million in cash. I certainly haven't. But you walk in with $2 million in cash, and the first circumstance that the bank is saying, deposit it, so $1.5 million into your account, we're giving you $50,000 back. Well, the $1,950,000 in your account, and we're giving you $50,000 back in cash. But that is not a rule. The exceptions that the bank will deal with. But there's a security element to that.
Ms. Boucher, before you come in, just let me clarify something. In their advisory, the banks had indicated that they will deal with cash changeovers up to $50,000. They said, however, if your pattern of cash transactions is more than $50,000, they will facilitate you. If it's a very large amount, like $500,000, that you want to change out $500,000 in polymer notes, they require 48 hours notice. All of that is in the advisory. Okay, so go ahead.
Right, so I just wanted to ask, in terms of the same standard fees though, do you think that citizens, seeing that they didn't have a choice in this matter, they have to change over the money, that they should be subject to the standard fees, as you put it, that banks usually charge for withdrawals and deposits, because you could choose whether you want to deposit money or not. Now you don't have much of a choice in that matter, seeing that you do have to receive the new polymer notes if you have the old notes. So that is just my question.
Are you making a proposal that the bank should relax their... I will raise it with the banks. I have found them to be very accommodating. There are some things where they say they just can't do. For example, that they told us today that if somebody walks in with $2 million and won't fill out the source of funds, they can't deal with that. That person has to go to the central bank. I would certainly speak to them about this, about whether they can relax their fees at this point in time. I will ask them. But I mean, we can't compel them. Each bank has its own procedures and so on. But I would certainly ask them to see whether in this period they could relax their usual fees and charges.
Just one last question. I know that you had said, I believe it was in Senate, that you had intended to speak to the central bank governor about merchants. Have you had that conversation with him? And if so, what has he said?
That's an ongoing, active discussion, because this is a very fluid situation in terms of what will happen after Christmas Day. That is really the issue, because everything is a build-up towards Christmas Day. And then, of course, Boxing Day is a holiday, so that it's really, you're talking about the 27th, the 28th, the 29th, and then they have 2 weekends there coming at you. The 27th is a Friday, the 28th is a Saturday, the 29th is a Sunday, then you have the 30th and 31st. We have asked the banks to remain open beyond their normal hours on Old Year's Day. We have asked them to open on Saturdays, and you will see the banks are accommodating us in this request. And we are having a very active discussion about what can be done for merchants who have large quantities of cash after the Christmas period is over, but it's an active discussion, so I would not want to make a definitive statement at this point in time. The point is, we understand what the issues are, and we will try our best to fashion a reasonable solution in the best interest of all concerned, but bearing in mind the national security objective of this exercise, bearing that in mind. Because the last thing you would want to do is to derail the national security objectives in this exercise. Okay?
Clear what happens if someone goes to the bank without any money, either refuses or they,
What do you consider a lot of money?
okay, $1 million.
$1 million in cash, okay?
Right.
And the source of funds document, there are problems. The bank either isn't satisfied or, and they go to the central bank. You all seem to be suggesting that the central bank has an obligation to take the money. Is that so? What happens?
What the central bank has said is that they require a form of identification, they require a proof of address, and they require the person to fill out their source of funds declaration. The central bank, each institution will have its own format for their source of funds declaration. So what the central bank has said, let's say somebody has $500,000, if they come to the central bank, produce proof of identification, produce proof of address, and fill out the central bank's source of funds declaration. And the law indicates that the central bank is obligated to redeem the notes, but the person is required to fill out the source of funds declaration that the central bank gives them to fill out. So it's not a free-for-all, if you're getting that impression.
In that case, then, what the central bank, if the source of funds is suspect, the central bank then fills out the suspicious
You see,
transaction.
you're getting into the whole question of what we can say and what we cannot say. You understand where I was before? I can't talk to you about that.
And the law is very, very clear. And this has just drawn things out of the woodworks, but understand that these legal obligations have existed in law for well over a decade. And you also have under the FIU regulations certain people who have to be registered jewelers, real estate agents. They are regulated
Listed
by
businesses.
these listed businesses. All right? There's just one other thing I'd like to say before we wrap up. This process is going to continue till the 31st of December. As you would see, today is just the third day that there've been the exchange of notes taking place. Keep informed. We will make sure through the Ministry of Communication, but we will be repeating the advice and the information provided by the central bank, as well as the banks through their Bankers Association. So you would have already seen them pushing out a number of releases, and through Ministry of Communication, we will keep you all in the loop, and if necessary, continue to have these types of discussions. Also, I would like to apologize for all of the inconvenience being felt outside by persons who are going through this exercise. We had always said and predicted that there would be inconvenience. Whenever you're dealing with issues of national security and crime, there's always going to be some element of inconvenience. But I'm happy that the banks themselves are listening. And as Minister Imbert alluded to, they are cooperating with us very well. So when we raise issues with them, they are seeking to address those issues, and we will continue to raise issues if and when they arise.
On any counterfeit money during this period of time?
Yes, there have been instances where counterfeit money has been picked up.
Thank you.
I'm not going to be able to give you all the exact specifics.
Yes, Angelo Marcel from News. Can you tell me, Mr. Minister?
You're
Angelo
shining a
Marcel
light.
from
You're
News.
shining a light in my eye.
Oh, it's on, sorry, my bad.
Right. Thank you. You're still shining a light in my eye. Okay.
I know based on the change in currency, you would be able to collect a lot more in corporation tax and VAT. What is that? How is that process going?
All right, let me just clear up a few things. It's not a change in currency. It's just a banknote change from cloth paper to polymer. That's it. Just like the $50. Those matters, again, I'm afraid I can't give you too much information as to what the Inland Revenue Division will do. all I can tell you is that we are monitoring the situation. That's it.
Minister Ms. Karen Kozia Philip TPG, any update on the legality of whether or not merchants can refuse the old $100 before the 31st?
The advice I have is the same advice I received when I answered that question in the Senate, I believe. The preliminary advice I received, but of course, the lawyers are continuing to research the law. They've looked at the law in England and in the rest of the Commonwealth because we are an English law system, a common law system. And so far, the law is that it's a private transaction between private entities, and therefore it's very difficult to compel somebody to accept the notes. But we're still looking because there's a discrimination argument that has been raised, so that we are being very, very careful about this. And I must tell you that we have engaged several distinguished lawyers to advise the Ministry of Finance on this and all of the aspects around this. So as these matters arise, we are getting advice on a daily basis as to how to treat with these issues such as that one.
On the matter of discrimination, I believe that the Mahasabha has filed a reaction protocol letter, a lawsuit against the Ministry of Finance and I think the Central Bank, saying that this whole exchange of money is a discriminatory in that the timeline is too short.
No, the Ministry of Finance has not received a pre-action letter. A pre-action letter was sent to the Attorney General, and we have received a copy of it. And in that letter, the attorneys for Mr. Vijay Maharaj have said that they intended, within 48 hours, to serve letters on the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Central Bank. But the argument is a property argument. That's when you look at what they're saying it's all revolves around the right to property. I'm not sure that it's a discrimination argument. It's a property argument. And this is something that's been tested in many jurisdictions. And of course, we are going to get the best legal advice we possibly can to make sure that we continue with this security initiative.
And what I can say is, again, the government, in rolling this process out, did seek and obtain legal advice from an English Queen's Counsel and one of the leading junior counsel in public law. So this wasn't something that we woke up with and just went to amend the legislation. So we had already looked at those issues.
Yes, we know the stated date by yourself and the Central Bank Governor, December 31st. We understand the legal notice says January 1st. Yes.
From January 1st. Go ahead.
All right, I'll explain that. The date of cancellation is December the 31st, 2019. What that means is that on the stroke of midnight on December 31st, 2019, the notes will no longer be legal tender. That means from 1 minute past midnight on the stroke of midnight, which is January 1st, that the notes will no longer be legal tender. So they're the same date. One is from January 1st, and the other is up to December 31st. It's all the same timeline. Okay?
So during the Old Year's Day, they will still be having exchange of
well, it all depends on the availability of the banks. Remember, the normal opening hours of the banks on Old Year's Day is half day. But we asked them to open much later on Old Year's Day. So that and they have said they will accommodate us, and we asked them to do that on Christmas Eve as well, because the normal closing on a Christmas Eve is also 12 o'clock, midday. So we've asked them, could you kindly open much later on Christmas Eve and much later on Old Year's Day? But at the stroke of midnight, the notes will cease to be legal tender December 31st. I beg your pardon?
Make sure and exchange your money before you go to FET. Okay.
No, I misstate. Is that a serious...
The question has come up like for Old Year's Night Mass, and people put all money into the collection basket.
After midnight on December 31st, Ms. Tate, let me try and address your question in a very serious way. After midnight on December 31st, 2019, the paper note, the existing note, will not be legal tender. Okay, so if unfortunately somebody is in possession of that, then they will have to show good and sufficient reason why they were unable to produce that note prior to January 1st. Okay?
We have a question from Melissa.
Okay, so I know, Minister Young, you said that this was carefully planned on the government's part, but the banks didn't know, so they haven't had a lot of time to put a lot of things into preparation. And the information, because like from reports coming into us as well, is that people are now going to their ATMs, withdrawing cash, and then standing in lines to go and change it out for the new Parliament notes, right? So in terms of the information, I guess that banks wouldn't have had, you know, the resources to put things in place to advise their customers or so forth. I don't know what we can do about that.
I'd like to just remind you all what Minister Imbert said a short while ago. Huh? That's very anecdotal. All right, you are saying you are being told. There are a lot of people who are saying a lot of things out there. For example, some of the videos that were sent to us at National Security have turned out to be false, in particular the videos of persons being robbed. And they're not from Trinidad and they're false. So understand this is something that we face always in this sphere. For this to be a successful national security drive, it had to be top secret. You could not tell people. But what you're seeing, though, is the efficiency of the planning by those who were in the know. So immediately, when it was announced at post-cabinet, the governor of the central bank simultaneously was meeting with the heads of the banks and telling them. So as we were announcing it to the public, the governor was announcing it to the banks. Minister Imbert, as the Minister of Finance, first thing on Friday morning, met with the banks for us, the government, to get an idea. I participated in that to also tell them the security aspects. So don't listen to all of the noise and what might be sent to you. The banks were not aware. No one was aware prior to the cabinet announcement. But what you've seen is a very efficient process so far, with some inconvenience, because there is always going to be inconvenience in these types of matters. But to be able to bring in, for example, $80,100,000 notes, get it safely, have it deposited, start the exercise, the exchange, etc. That takes a lot of logistics. So contrary to the suggestions, you are actually seeing the benefits of the efficiency of planning and those who are charged with the responsibility.
Let me just say something here. It would not have made practical sense to tell the banks, well in advance of this measure, the security considerations would be lost entirely. So it can't be that you're planning something like this for national security reasons and then you go and tell everybody a month before. That can't work. From a common sense, practical common sense point of view, that wasn't practical. So you have to start the process, and I just want to repeat, I am very pleasantly surprised, I want to congratulate the banks that they were able to reduce that initial 3 months time frame they gave us to retrofit their ATMs from 3 months to 2 days. I really want to thank the banks for doing that. And they're rolling out, they understand the importance of all of this. And I mean, that is a real positive for us that the banks have been able to do that. And I suspect within the next couple of days, most of the ATMs in the country will be able to dispense the polymer notes. Let's say within the next 3 or 4 days, I suspect so. Of course, we're getting reports, so I'll have actual figures. But that was really an achievement on the part of the banks, and we couldn't tell them before, unfortunately.
Minister Young, have you heard about any robberies in terms of, as how you have all these transactions happening, heightened transactions? Have you heard about any robberies associated with those things?
There have been a couple isolated incidents. You all have already reported them, not outside and around, but as I say, and again, I don't want to talk about what are the national security, but I can tell you the state security services are out there, they are working, they are providing that extra blanket, and they will continue to do so. Okay?
Non-financial institutions being monitored at this stage?
When you say non-financial institutions?
People who may be looking to money launder.
So absolutely. I mean, the whole part of this exercise is to deal with one of the elements is money laundering. So yes, the state services are very aware and are monitoring certain places that would be known, businesses would be known to be engaging, and that is why we emphasize very early o'clock, reminding the population of the offense of money laundering. And then the police had a whole press conference yesterday. They're the ones charged with the responsibility, along with the FIU, talking about the instances and the crime of money laundering, etc. So, but again, I don't want to say much about it. Okay, I'll pass it over to Minister Cox.
We have a
at this
final
stage.
question.
Well, we understand that the central bank has had this process in train for some time, and we know that national security approached saying, well, okay, we want to do it. Did the central bank have original?
The central bank did not have the process in place for a long time. So the attempt to claim credit from way back when someone had a job is a figment of his imagination. This process was commenced by this administration, as the Prime Minister very clearly said in answer to Prime Ministerial questions yesterday. It began as a secret operation in 2017, and what you're seeing now is the carrying out of that operation that was kept on a very, very needs-to-know basis.
So it's always initiated by national security.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.